Okay, everybody, thank you so much for hopping on. I'm just going to go through few different scenarios where we've seen deals go sideways. Um, this is all kind of a collaboration of things from the legal hotline, things that we get on our compliance line, and things that we have seen come up over the last couple months. The market has definitely changed a little bit. We're running across a lot more people actually having inspections, and then things that can go south around that. So some of this is included here. Again, as always, open discussion is welcome. If you have a question or you have something you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to just hop in at any point. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to provide a little clarity around is the use of an amendment versus a notice. So, a notice is something that you're going to send when it doesn't require the other party's agreement. An amendment is something when both parties need to agree to modifying terms. So, if it's something that's modifying the contract for what it is, you cannot use a notice because it would require both parties to accept that, which would need to be an amendment. So the amendment is proposing change to the original contract. You want to use this for price drops, changing the deadline. If you're adding, I don't know, something property related, negotiating fixes, this has to be an amendment and it has to be signed by all parties or it's not valid. So, for instance, if you're sending an amendment proposing work to be done for an inspection and they don't sign it, and nothing's come to some sort of resolution before that deadline is passed, it is not binding. A notice is something that you're going to use when the seller's opting for the right to cure, or if he's opting to not utilize his right to cure, or if they're satisfying some sort of contingency, like financing has been obtained. Here's the loan commitment letter. We're giving you the permission to pass it along to the listing agent to satisfy that contingency, notification that a house has sold if there's a home sale contingency in, um, or if you're sending a notice of defects, you can use a notice, as well as if your loan has been rejected, you would use a notice notifying them that the loan has been denied and a denial letter from the lender. This is just a flow chart that's available on the WRA. I would be happy to send it out to anybody who would be interested as well. It just kind of explains, and I think this is helpful for clients to see as well, how it would work if you were to have a home inspection and things need to be done. If they have the right to cure, you can see there's a lot more activity and roundabout ways that things can go, where the right to cure at the top is much more simplified. So, explaining to them, especially as we are moving into a market that is less competitive, there are still price points that are very competitive, of course, but we're kind of seeing and finding that some of the houses are just not as competitive as they used to be, and perhaps maybe the right to cure wouldn't be necessary to allow in some of the offer writing that we're doing now. So this is just a really helpful flow chart to not only for you, but I feel like for the client to look at so that they fully understand what it means to have the right to cure in that offer and what it means for them. Same thing with the seller. I think it really helps outline, okay, here is how this can all go. So, a notice of defects. So, the example given here was that the inspection is Friday, the report was received Saturday, and the inspection contingency is Monday. So, a lot of, when should an amendment be signed? What happens if an agreement cannot be made by Monday? Um, what we're kind of seeing is that sometimes someone will send an amendment over saying, hey, we're asking for these items. And then the deadline is passing. And then really the inspection contingency waives itself. Nothing was agreed upon. There was no protection put in place ahead of time. Typically, we want to try and get the inspector in sooner than that 2 days prior or 3 days prior to the actual deadline. Obviously, that's not always the case, but we always want to be prepared that we have potentially a notice of defect ready to go and ready to send out to the seller if they can't come to some sort of an agreement prior to that deadline. That's not to say that past the deadline, you can't come to some sort of agreement and pull that notice of defect back. However, you should be sending that out if you can't come to some sort of an agreement and the buyer doesn't want to continue without coming to some sort of resolution or that they want out. So that's one thing that we've seen a lot of people using the wrong document, assuming that it's handled when it's not, I guess is the best way to put it. So again, you would need a notice of defects for that situation if you can't come to an agreement to protect your client if they're the buyer. The other thing that we've run across a lot is that the buyer will deliver a notice of defects by the deadline, but without the inspection report included. I personally have had this burn me years and years ago, probably, I don't even know, but I had a notice of defects sent well before the contingency was up, but I failed to attach the inspection report. The inspection report should be delivered promptly per the lines of the offer, 190 through 191. So whenever the inspection report comes in, you want to forward that to the listing agent so that they have a copy of it. That would be the delivering promptly. Ideally, you're not holding it back so that everybody can review it before you chat with them. You want to just shoot it over, say, hey, we're going to be talking through this. I'll get back to you kind of thing. But if you are going through it and they want to serve a notice of defects, the notice does need to explicitly state that this is a notice of defects and the buyer objects to the following defects noted in the inspection report. You don't need to go as far as saying the date and who it was performed by, but you definitely should at least attach it at the bottom part of the notice. You can add an attachment. You want to attach the report there and attach the report to the actual email that you're sending over, serving the notice of defects for it to be valid and for there to be no gray area in terms of if you actually sent that notice of defect appropriately. So a notice of defects in an offer with the right to cure does not automatically make the contract null and void. And I think that that's something a lot of people don't understand as well when they offer the right to cure ahead of time, which is why I think that initial flow chart that I showed is really helpful to show people so that they better understand what it means when they're giving the right to cure. So a lot of times I think agents and clients alike are thinking, okay, we sent this notice of defect over, we're done. We don't, we can get out of this contract. That's not the case when you have the right to cure. And a lot of the part of the right to cure that people have issue with is they don't get to dictate how the defects are cured. So it's pretty vague in the offer, per lines 220 through 221, the seller may cure defects in a good and workmanlike manner and deliver a buyer a written report detailing the work done no later than 3 days prior to closing. That's all they need to do. So you're not able to say, hey, we want a licensed, insured, roofing contractor to come in and fix this, and this is how we want it fixed. As long as it's considered good and workmanlike and they, deliver a written report detailing the work done, there's not a lot of say to be had by the buyer, which is obviously why we prefer to figure it out via amendment. But this is also something that I think is really important to mention to the client when you're explaining the right to cure is that, if they opt to cure and you still want the house, that's great. They're going to fix it, but you don't get to dictate how it's fixed, where you would if you're able to come to some sort of an agreement with an amendment. A lot of people get in trouble with vague amendment language. So when you are writing an amendment for the purpose of trying to negotiate with the seller on things around the inspection, you definitely want to be a little more detailed than something like the seller shall repair roof prior to closing. We see a lot of amendments with very vague amendment language, and I think it can really get people frustrated, hot water, all of the things. It's best just to be as detailed as possible. And a lot of times you can use the verbiage that they write into the inspection report. They might say, have a licensed plumber fix the leak in, the bathroom sink, whatever it is, so that you can kind of use, like, if you're not sure what type of contractor needs to be doing something or what exactly needs to be done, you can reference that inspection report and kind of go from there versus saying, fix the leak in the bathroom. Well, A, you're not saying which bathroom. I mean, there's a lot of ambiguity there that could cause issues. So like in this instance, seller shall repair the roof prior to closing. Well, okay, there's only a couple shingles that were leaking. So the seller's like, well, I'm just going to fix the 2 shingles. And the buyer's expecting a full tear off. That's where you want to write very clearly what needs to be in. The seller needs to have a licensed insured roofing contractor evaluate the leak at the southwest corner of the house, be very specific as to where they're going to be working on these items. And then have them do any and all suggested repair or replacement and have that completed no later than a specific amount prior to closing. I usually pick like 3 days, making sure that they're providing paid invoices and lien waivers. And then any kind of warranty that's available with that work shall be given to the buyer as well prior to closing. This just is much clearer. It says exactly what needs to be done. The seller's not the one who gets to say, well, these 2 shingles are what's going to fix it. You're having a professional evaluate that and make those decisions. And then the risk and liability is kind of, hey, this is what the professional said. So does anyone have any questions up to this point? Okay. So the buyer has the clear to close and a loan commitment, and they haven't provided it to the seller, and the deadline passes. Just ran across a call like this. The loan commitment was given to the buyer. The buyer's agent had a copy of it, but the listing agent didn't get the copy of it. They didn't get the copy with the permission from the buyer to pass it along to the listing agent to satisfy the contingency. This is unlike the other contingencies, like the financing, in that when it waives itself, nothing really happens with the, except that nothing will happen in terms of fixes. If this deadline passes and you have not provided the financing contingency, the seller could provide a notice to terminate because this deadline was not met. So if you aren't able to get this loan commitment to the seller by this deadline, it would be prudent to try and get them to agree to an extension so that you're still within contract. If you're talking to the loan officer and they're like, hey, we're going to need a few more days, whatever that might look like, because once it's passed and you haven't sent it, you are technically out of contract. And that creates risk for the buyer that the seller provides a notice to terminate because the deadline wasn't met. Where we see this happen most often is if they have a secondary offer in place that they want to move to primary. So it's really important that you are very aware of this deadline and that you are doing what you need to do to make sure that the buyer is able to send that loan commitment by that date. Another issue we run across is that when there's no financing or appraisal in the offer, but a lot of times buyers will say we don't need financing, or this is quote unquote cash offer, but they are getting financing, or something along those lines. Per the contract, the seller is agreeing to allow inspectors, testers, and appraisers reasonable access if necessary. So even if there is no financing contingency in the offer, they should still be allowing access to an appraiser to help the buyer finance the property. They're agreeing to that up front, whether or not there's an appraisal contingency or even a financing contingency at play. So that is something that would need to be done to, keep the transaction moving forward. And they should allow reasonable access to that person. Damage before closing is something that we've seen, especially with the amount of rain that we've had recently, because it's not like someone, made a giant hole in the wall or, things that or took, a stereo system, things that we used to be running across pretty regularly. In this instance, and this is a real instance that happened recently, the buyer saw water in the basement at the final walkthrough, like a reasonable amount of water as well. And the seller said, well, you had your inspection and we saw that too, but we think it's the grading, and we fixed that already. That's the issue. Um, the final walkthrough is there for a reason. It's to make sure that the home is in the condition it was at the first walkthrough. If there's any issues found at that final walkthrough, this is where they're finding them and addressing them prior to closing with both parties. This was a vacant house, so they might not have seen it or whatever, but it would be prudent for the seller to either have someone evaluate the intrusion and fix it, like whatever the cause is per that professional, or at least allow the buyer to do that. Failure to disclose something or remedy could result in legal action. So this is where it gets a little hairy in terms of you might need an attorney sooner than later if the parties can't agree to some sort of agreement of sorts with how that would be fixed and what everybody's comfortable with. So this is something that, again, the water specifically because of the rain that we've had over the last almost year, it feels like, is an issue. So just reminding them that it's important for them to have it evaluated, or at least have an attorney look over the situation at that point. Oops. Okay, so that is it in terms of slides. Does anybody have any personal situation, questions, anything like that I can answer?
Ashley, I just want to share too. You talked about final walkthrough.
Mm-hmm.
That's also I had a situation where it was a duplex and we went through the final walkthrough and one of the stoves was missing. So that's also why you take amendments or listings, pay attention to the listings while you're there, because I've heard stories of people switching out like appliances where let's say it's a Samsung at the showing, but then there's a GE at the closing, and I just wanted to put that out there, checking to make sure all those things are in place too at final walkthrough.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the kind of stuff that we used to run across a lot more. I mean, we still do, but I would say water has been kind of in the forefront up to, this point, or
Yeah,
damage of
yeah,
that sort. But yeah, like we've had people that, there's like wired in stereo systems that are supposed to be included and they have been gone at the walkthrough. Or, things like you're saying, exactly, like moving or taking the appliance out entirely, or whatever. I had someone take the bathroom mirror. It just is good to do that final walkthrough, but also set the expectation if you're a seller's agent that, hey, like everything needs to be the same as when they first walked through the property. And that's what this is for. It's not making sure that you made, swept the floors well enough, which I mean, obviously people are looking for that too, but ideally it's making sure the property is the way it was and when they walked through the first time. So setting expectation around that for everyone is helpful.
and a question for you for like rugs being down during showings and then seeing what's under them afterwards. What is what does that look like?
So that's kind of that's where it gets a little hairy. It can become like a legal situation, but typically we try to come to some sort of agreement and or resolution prior to closing, whether it be some sort of credit or whatever. But that's why we want to have those final walkthroughs, because I've had people have like a hole in the floor that they didn't tell anybody about. So there's just, and that could be considered, failure to disclose or lots of other things. So that's something I mean, again, it could get into legal territory, like attorney territory, but ideally you want to come to some sort of resolution that everybody agrees to.
Including
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. As always, we're resources for you at any point, so feel free to reach out to the compliance hotline. But otherwise, I appreciate your time and I will see you all later.